So what I'm going to be talking about today is styling PDF documents with Quarto. But I thought I'd give you a little bit of an introduction to myself so you have a little bit more context for what I'm going to be talking about. So my academic background is in statistics and operational research, and that is where I started using R probably about 10 years ago now. I do also have experience in statistics and data science consultancy, and I am now a lecturer in health data science in the Center for Health Informatics, Computing and Statistics in the medical school at Lancaster. So I have quite a range of research interests. I'm one of those people that does lots of different things. But one of the things I particularly care about is thinking about reproducible research. And it picks up some of the things that Andre says, sort of moving away from Word documents and PowerPoints and starting to think about things like Quarto and making all of our research materials and teaching materials reproducible. So in terms of this talk, we're going to talk about creating PDF documents with Quarto. And we're going to talk about styling those PDF documents. In terms of when I say styling PDF documents, I'm talking about the technical aspects of styling them rather than recommendations for how you might want to make them look. I'll leave that completely up to you. I'm also going to talk about the pros and cons of Typest and LaTeX for PDFs. If those two words mean absolutely nothing to you, that's absolutely fine at this point. Hopefully by the end of the talk, you will have an idea of what those are. And we'll talk a little bit about how do you combine our outputs with these different types of PDFs. So in terms of why should you care about styling documents, okay? If you're a researcher or a data scientist, you probably care a little bit more about modeling, about analytics, of working with data, and this sort of styling and how do you make it look probably comes right at the end, and it's something that you might rush through or might not care very much about. So one of the reasons is consistency. The idea of defining some sort of style is that you define it once, and then everybody can use it. So if you have multiple people in your company making quarterly reports, they're going to look the same no matter who makes them. Okay? If you're an academic and you're making sort of journal papers, okay, you're probably familiar with journal formatting, is that all authors will make papers that look the same. If you put a little bit of effort into styling your documents, they usually look a little bit more professional as well. I quite often sort of say that the default options usually look like the default options. Like, they're fine, but they're not that great. The third point is kind of around engagement, so it's usually easier to read stuff that actually looks nice. If you get a Word document that has 5 different types of fonts, different font sizes, nothing's sort of consistent, it's quite hard to actually read it. If something is nicely presented, it's just easier and more enjoyable to read. Okay, so before we sort of get into the meat of the talk, I did want to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. And that is that I don't really like PDF documents, okay? They're not particularly accessible. The idea of PDFs is that they are quite hard to edit after you've made a PDF. And some people see that as a wonderful feature because it feels more secure and no one's going to change your data in the way it's presented. But it's also less accessible. It's harder to change fonts or colors to something that suits you. Okay? But if I do have to make PDFs, I typically make them with Quarto. So if you're not familiar with Quarto already, it's essentially a technical publishing system that lets you combine code with lots of other things, like images or text or plots, tables, pretty much anything you like. And so it combines different sort of types of languages. So it works with R, but it also works with Python, Julia, Observable, etc. Okay, so the nice thing about Quarto is that if you have some Python users in your organization, the sort of styling we'll talk about today will just also work out of the box for them. So it's a more general solution. So once you've decided to make your PDF documents and you've decided that you're making them with Quarto, the next question is it LaTeX or is it Typest? Okay, so we'll go through some examples of each of these and then we'll discuss at the end which one do you pick. So let's start with LaTeX. Okay? So if you make a Quarto document, okay, so you start with the YAML at the top. So this is all of your document-wide properties. Okay, so things like title, date, author, etc. And crucially, also the format. Okay, it's nice and user-friendly. So if you want to make a PDF, you tell it that the format is PDF. Okay? And then after that, you put all of your content, so your code, images, etc. And you can see an example here of what your out-of-the-box PDF document looks like. Okay? It's fine. It's legible. If it's a little bit boring, it could probably be a little bit better. There are some built-in options within Quarto for styling your PDF outputs. Okay? So you can change things like the link color. Okay? So you might say that you want all of the URLs in your document to be red. And I'll leave a link there to the Quarto documentation where you can look through those built-in options. If you've been working with Quarto before and you're used to having sort of HTML output and customizing it, you'll probably find that the PDF options are a bit more limited. There's less things you can change easily in Quarto. And so what you typically have to do is go and write some LaTeX code. Okay? So LaTeX is essentially a typesetting system for documents that tries to separate out the content from the styling. And basically Quarto and our Markdown use LaTeX to convert from Quarto to PDF. So if you've never heard of LaTeX before and you don't think you're using it, but you're making PDFs in Quarto, you have been using it. Okay? So what you can do is you can add your own LaTeX styling to your PDFs. Okay? So in the YAML of your Quarto document, you can add a LaTeX file. You can link to a file. Okay? Similarly, you can link to a CSS file if you're making HTML documents. Okay? You can link to a LaTeX file. And then you can put anything you like in your style file for LaTeX. Okay? Now this is a very, very small example. Okay? So it loads a couple of packages, it defines some colors, and it says, okay, let's make the section heading color this new color that we've defined. Okay? And that's a very small amount of things we're trying to do, and already the LaTeX code looks kind of horrible. Okay? It's not particularly nice looking. Okay? But you can see that it gradually changes how your PDF looks. So the thing about LaTeX is that it's not particularly user-friendly. And if you just want to make a quick change to your PDF, you probably don't want to go and have to learn LaTeX just to change a color, for example. So what you can do is you can use Quarto extensions. Okay? And Quarto extensions are just a way to extend the behavior of Quarto. So in the same way that you have R packages that extend the behavior of R, Quarto extensions are essentially extensions of base Quarto. And so you can use extensions to add styling to your documents. Okay? So you don't necessarily have to go and learn LaTeX yourself. You just have to find someone else who learns LaTeX and then use theirs. I don't want to add that extensions aren't just about styling in Quarto. There's extensions for lots of different things. Okay? So you can have extensions for sort of adding Shiny apps within Quarto documents, HTML forms, icons, fonts, anything you like. So what do Quarto extensions look like for LaTeX styling? Okay? There's a range of different ways you can share Quarto extensions. The easiest way is to install them from GitHub. Okay? So you might do something like Quarto install, name of the extension, and then sort of where it comes from on GitHub. Okay? So this is an example of a Quarto extension that I built for adding LaTeX styling to PDFs. So you can install the extension, and what that does is it basically downloads those LaTeX files that someone else has written. And the only thing you need to change is the format. Okay? So rather than doing format PDF, you do format and the sort of name of the extension -PDF. Everything else remains the same. Okay? So you can add your code, text, images, etc. in exactly the same way. And what you get out is a very differently styled PDF. Okay? So as a user, I haven't necessarily had to go and learn LaTeX. I've just had to run a line that downloads some LaTeX files, change the format, and I get the styled PDF. With Quarto, you're most likely adding some sort of code to your documents. Given the audience, I'm assuming that's probably mostly R code. So you can add sort of LaTeX styling within R elements as well. Okay? So if you're doing things like adding tables, you can make tables with sort of knitr or cable extra. And you can put some LaTeX options into these, so that translates into the PDF. There's also the GT package for tables as well. So the nice thing about these types of packages is that it works for HTML and LaTeX. So if you want to output multiple format types, your R code doesn't need to change. There's some downsides of LaTeX. Okay? So even if you are using a Quarto extension and you're not writing your LaTeX, inevitably at some point you'll get some sort of error, and it will probably make no sense whatsoever, and it'll be quite hard to debug, and you'll probably copy and paste the error and stick it into Google, and you'll get a very wide range of solutions, and it'll be hard to figure out which one to use if you're not very familiar with LaTeX. LaTeX you typically also need to install separately from Quarto, so you need to have some sort of LaTeX distribution on your system. That can be a little bit annoying, particularly if you're just getting started and all you want to do is make a PDF. You don't want to have to install extra things. LaTeX can also be quite slow. Okay? If you're making quite big documents, it can take quite a while, because what LaTeX is sometimes doing is actually rendering twice. Okay? So particularly if you have things like cross-references, so between one section in your document to another, it renders the whole thing, tries to figure out what the page numbers are, and then renders it again with the cross-references. So if you're just making a one-page document, it's not really a problem. If you're making something that's quite a long document, that gets annoying very, very quickly. So what if there was some other way of making PDFs in Quarto? Well, there is. Okay? So we can also make Quarto PDFs with Typest. Right? So Typest is also a typesetting system that's designed to be as powerful as LaTeX, so you can make things as customized as you could with LaTeX. But the idea is that it's going to be easier to learn, and it's going to be faster. Okay? Now, Typest is very, very new in the grand scheme of things. It's only been around since December 2022. So when we're talking about features of Typest, sort of keep your expectations reasonable. Okay? You can't expect that something that's been around for less than 18 months to be as mature and as perfect for something that's been going around for almost 40 years. Okay? It comes packaged with recent versions of Quarto. Okay? So you don't have to install anything extra. If you've installed version 1.4 or more recently of Quarto, then you have everything you need to make Typest PDFs already. And so it's very similar, you'll see, to the sort of LaTeX PDFs. Okay? So here you set format to Typest, and it comes out with your plain document. Okay? They're not identical to LaTeX, they are slightly different, they're different systems, but again, it's that sort of plain basic PDF that you get out to start with. There are also some built-in options for Typest output in Quarto, so you can do things like change the font. I think the options for Typest currently are still a little bit more limited than LaTeX. So you might, again, want to add your own styling. Okay? And I'm hoping that you can kind of see parallels between the two here. Okay? So you're sort of, again, saying the format is Typest, and here's some extra files. Okay? So with Typest, you usually have 2 files rather than 1. So you would have the sort of types.show file, which basically says things like create an article with the title that I've got in the Quarto YAML and put it into my Typest document. And then you have the Typest template file, which is where you define all of your styling elements. Okay, so you can set a default title. Okay, so if someone doesn't set a title in your Quarto document, it'll use the default. So that might be quite useful if you're creating sort of branded reports and you always want the title to be the name of your company, for example. And then you can define different types of styling. Okay, so again, you can do things like change the link color or change the title and make small changes to your document. And there are Quarto extensions for Typest. Again, this is very new, so there are fewer extensions for Typest, but they work very similarly to PDF extensions for LaTeX. So you install the extension, and it downloads the .type file with the styling, and then you can change the format in the YAML. So I'll show an example here of one of the sort of example templates built by the Quarto team. You can get very customized reports. Okay, so this doesn't really look anything like your default Quarto document. It doesn't necessarily look like it was built in Quarto or R at all. Types outputs from R, again, a little bit more limited currently. The tiny table package in R does work with types output. Okay, so you can create your table and then add some styling. So you might want to specify, for example, I want to color a particular cell in my table red. You can set the color of individual cells and color them. And this works out of the box with types as well, which is really nice. And the tiny table package does work with HTML and LaTeX PDFs as well. So you can output to multiple output formats at the same time if you want to. So then we kind of get into the question. Okay, we've got these two different approaches to making PDFs. You can make kind of the same thing with each of them. So how do you decide which one you're going to use? So usually when I'm thinking about which one of two options do I want to use, I'm usually thinking, okay, which one is the easiest to use? Which one is going to cause me the least amount of pain? And so to compare the two, I did the obvious thing and built the same thing twice. Okay? So I built a Quarto extension to add PDF styling with LaTeX, which is the one on the left, and then I rebuilt the same Quarto extension, adding type styling, and that's the one on the right. Okay? You will notice that they're not entirely identical. That's mainly because I ran out of time faffing around with different lines of code, but you can get something fairly similar, right? So you can get two documents that look fairly similar. How different is the code beneath them? That's my kind of question. So I want to share a small snippet of the LaTeX code. Okay? So this is a LaTeX code that adds the purple bar on the right-hand side. Okay? So it's one thing, it's basically just drawing a purple rectangle. Okay? Now to do that, I'm adding sort of 3 different other packages. I'm then sort of defining the size of the page. And then I have some like weird looking code that if you're just reading that code, it's quite hard to figure out that all it's doing is drawing a rectangle. Okay? That's the kind of code that if I saw it, I'd probably Google it and try to figure out what it's doing. I can't necessarily see what it's doing from the code itself. If you compare that to the typed version, that's much easier to understand, in my opinion. Okay, you're sort of putting some page settings. You're defining what's the margin on the sort of left, right, top, and bottom. And then I want to say in the background, starting from the top right, draw a rectangle, fill it with this color, make it 100% of the height, and make it 3 centimeters wide. I can read the types code. Okay? I think I'm at the point where I probably spend more time reading code than I do writing it. So if I see code that's easy to read, I like it a lot more. Okay? And the types code for me, I can look at it and understand what it's doing. LaTeX a little bit less so. So we're thinking about the pros and cons of LaTeX versus types. Why might you choose LaTeX over types? Right? So one of the reasons is that you might want to include equations. Okay, LaTeX is reasonably famous for being used by mathematicians and statisticians and writing quite big, long, complicated equations. It has been around for 40 years, so if there's a very niche specific thing you're trying to do, someone has probably already done it and you can use that. With types, you can write equations and sort of mathematical notation in types, but it's a little bit less advanced. There is currently more flexibility with images and tables in LaTeX. Again, I do sort of say this is currently, okay? Types in Quarto and sort of using it with R is so new that people are working on sort of improving this. So that's one of the things that might move to the other side quite soon. As an academic, I'm usually thinking about how am I going to write my papers and our journal's going to be up for this. They're not ready for Quarto or Typest yet. Okay, so most journals that I submit to will say, send us a Word document or send us your LaTeX files. Okay? And with Quarto, you can, as well as outputting the PDF, you can output the the LaTeX files as well. So it is an option to use Quarto to create your articles and upload LaTeX files, but they're not really ready for Quarto files themselves most of the time, and they're definitely not ready for Typest files yet. The other reason to use LaTeX is that you're already using LaTeX. Okay? If you already know LaTeX and you're quite happy with it, and maybe you built loads of stuff using it, then keep using it. Okay? If it's not broken, don't try and fix it. Okay? There's no reason to go and rewrite everything you've already done using Typest. If it's working for you, keep using it. We can also think about what are the reasons to use Typest. Okay? Personal opinion is that I think it's easier to learn. Okay? So when I did this sort of experiment of let's build a Quarto extension twice, I would say I found them equally difficult. Okay? I've been using LaTeX for like about 8 years, but I'd been using Typest for about 10 minutes. And I found them sort of equally challenging to do exactly what I wanted to do. So to me, Typest felt a little bit easier to learn. Part of that, I think, was that the Quarto team do have those example extensions, so there is sort of a starting point for you there. The other reason I like Typest is that there's nice informative error messages. Okay? If you're building something for the first time, you will get error messages, you're going to break it, that's how you learn. The error messages you get typically have error codes and a little bit of a suggestion of how you might want to fix it. So to me, it reminded me a little bit of the tidyverse, where it's sort of, okay, here's the error, I think you've probably done this, did you actually mean to do that? And that as a user is quite a nice experience, in contrast to LaTeX, where I still don't think I understand what half the error messages actually mean. The other reason is that there's no extra installations. If you're already using Quarto, you've got everything you need to start using Typest. So you can kind of play around with it without spending too much time figuring out the setup and the technical aspects of how it works. The final reason to kind of use Typest for me is speed. So I kind of heard that Typest was a bit faster, and then I started rendering documents, and it's a lot faster. Okay, so Typest is actually built on Rust, okay, which some of you might be familiar with, and it is just much, much quicker. And it does sort of live updates as well. So when you're building PDFs with LaTeX, you usually have to re-render the whole thing, and it goes through the whole process of making your PDF. With Typest, when you sort of update a little bit of the styling, it automatically re-renders, and you're getting this much quicker preview of how has my code changed, what the output looks like, or indeed, how have I broken it this time. So I will leave you with some links. So the links to these slides are up online. I did also write a couple of blog posts explaining how I made the extensions with LaTeX and how I made them with Typest and sort of how the two compare. And there's also Typest documentation, LaTeX help, and Quarto documentation. So if you are trying to play around with these two different things, those are a really good place to start, and there's lots of example extensions to get started with. But otherwise, thank you very much.